All right, we're going to get started. Hello, thank you very much for coming this evening. My name is Tora Johnson. I'm a professor here at the University of Maine at Machias, and I'm going to be moderating the forum tonight. I'd like to begin by introducing our brand new head of campus and vice president for academic affairs, Andy Egan, and he's going to say a few words.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Tora. Welcome to the Performing Arts Center here on the campus of the University of Maine at Machias for this evening's Gubernatorial Candidate Forum. I would like to take this opportunity to thank members of the University of Maine Machias community and the League of Women Voters of Maine for organizing and hosting this event. And then finally, special thanks to our three candidates for participating in tonight's event, providing voters of Down East Maine and beyond the opportunity to get to know them and their positions on issues important to our region and our state. Without further ado, I'd like to turn the podium back to tonight's moderator, Professor Tora Johnson, who will introduce the candidates and kick off this forum. Professor Johnson.
Thank you. So I'll say a few words to get us started and orient us to what's going to happen tonight. First of all, I want to say thank you to the League of Women Voters for co-sponsoring with the University of Maine at Machias this forum, and thank you very much to the candidates who have joined us for this evening. We've got Janet Mills and Alan Caron and Terry Hayes. Unfortunately, Sean Moody declined the invitation to be here tonight. So a couple of ground rules. Prior to the start of the forum, the candidates drew lots to select their seating order, and so they're in the order that you see from Janet Mills to Alan Caron, and Terry Hayes in that order. And they'll begin their opening statements in that order, and then we'll shift the order by one for each of the questions, wrapping up at the end with their closing statements. The candidates will have 3 minutes to begin for their opening statements. I'll invite each of you to the podium if you'd like to make your statements, and then they'll have 2 minutes each to respond to questions. Attendees can submit questions. So far, I only have a few, and if you see right there in the gray blazer, Megan Duff has note cards for you. We may or may not be able to get to all your questions, but we welcome them all, and I will, as the moderator, I'll reserve the right to merge similar questions as needed in the interest of time. Professor Rebecca Bragg is here in the front, and she'll be doing the timing. And she'll hold up a white card at 1 minute when the candidates have 1 minute left, a yellow card when you have 15 seconds, and a red card when your time is up for that response. And remember, it'll be 3 minutes for opening statements, 2 minutes for questions and closing statements. And then after the forum, the candidates have brought materials, and you're welcome to come down and meet and greet and survey the wares. All right. And so we're going to begin with opening statements, and I would like to invite the candidates to the podium if they'd like. You'd have 3 minutes, and beginning with Janet Mills.
Thank you, Tora. Thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here this evening in Washington County in Machias and talk to you about why I'm running for governor. There are a lot of reasons, and the more I think about it, the more reasons I find every day in the campaign trail. I meet new people and get new ideas and things I want to do come January across the state. But especially areas, the rim counties around the state, and Washington County in particular, which has so many needs. I grew up in western Maine in one of those rim counties in Franklin County. I live there now, and I brought up my children. When I was district attorney for Franklin, Oxford, and Androscoggin counties, I met and married my husband, Stan. He was a widower with 5 daughters. 5 daughters. They were ages 4 to 16 when we met, and slightly older when we married. So I took on a pretty big challenge at that time, and I think if I can get through that, I could probably run state government, you know? But more seriously, and we're all best of friends, and I love them dearly, and I learned so much about relationships and compassion and family values by bringing up those 5 children and being a career woman at the same time. And we're all very, very good friends. My husband passed away 4 years ago this month. And over that last year of his life, well, he lay ill after having a stroke. I learned an awful lot about the healthcare system in Maine as well. And there are a lot of things I want to fix. And it astounds me that the number one issue on businesses' minds is health care. And the number one issue on people's minds is health care. We have an administration right now, which Mr. Moody apparently follows, which does not want to expand Medicaid. They're doing everything in their power not to expand Medicaid. And I think that's important thing to do. More than a year ago, we saw state government shut down. That was a tragedy. There's no necessity for state government to shut down. I want to be the governor who brings back civil discourse, who works across the aisle, who gets things done. And I know we're going to talk about that soon, but I also want to be the governor who takes us in a new direction. Looking at the jobs report, for the next 8 years, we're looking at zero job growth unless we do some different things in this state. We look at the opioid epidemic, and I know we're going to deal with that a little later on too. Looking at solar energy, I want to be the governor that has a vision of a state that is undivided, a state where seniors have heat in their home, where veterans have a home to go to, where small businesses are cherished and supported, where young people have good paying jobs here close to home, and where we generate our own renewable resources and have internet and cell phone coverage everywhere across the state. Thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Alan Karen. I'm running as an independent in this race. I was here just a week ago with my 13-year-old son. I took him to Quebec and across the top of Maine and then down from Fort Kent. I wanted him to see parts of Maine that I knew he hadn't seen before. I grew up in Waterville in a family of mill workers and farmers. And it's mill workers and farmers and rural people in general who have taken the worst hit in the last 50 years as the economy has changed repeatedly. And I always remember those folks, and I am dedicated to trying to help find opportunities for them that haven't been there and their children. I grew up in an apartment building. 100 years ago, my grandfather rode a horse and buggy over the mountains on Route 201 from Quebec. 50 years ago, my parents' generation moved out of the apartments in the south end of Waterville into their own houses. Along with millions of Americans across the country, they joined the middle class. Their grandchildren, my nephews and nieces, now work at Walmart in the overnight shift or in the nursing home or waiting tables. They don't have the opportunities that their parents had. This is the first generation in American history with fewer opportunities and more debt than their parents had. I dropped out of school just starting the 9th grade and went to work with my hands, loading tractor-trailer trucks, working in the mill in Augusta, and eventually learning to become a carpenter. I worked for some years as in construction. I went on to build 2 small businesses, to get a master's degree from the Kennedy School at Harvard University, and to devote much of my life to making Maine a better place, and in the last 15 years in particular, focusing on the economy, which is the focus of my campaign. All of the problems we have in Maine are growing problems if we don't figure out how to build an economy that creates opportunity and lifts people up. And so while in all of these venues we talk about this need and that need and that need and that need, and they're all legitimate problems, unless we build a stronger and more vibrant economy, we will not have the resources to meet those needs. And the situation is getting worse. You may know that 2 weeks ago, the State Labor Department issued a report projecting how many jobs we would grow in the next 8 years. The number is 100. We cannot stand that. Thank you.
Good evening. I want to echo the thanks. It seems that we're grateful both to Tora, Megan, Andy, and Rebecca for helping put this on this evening, and also obviously to the League of Women Voters for co-sponsoring. My name is Terry Hayes, and I want to be your next governor. Maine politics has become all about partisan bickering and keeping score. Who's up, who's down, who's in, who's out, who gets the credit, and who gets the blame. The political parties aren't the problem, but the partisanship is. Electing another partisan Democrat or Republican as governor just guarantees more fighting and gridlock in Augusta, and I'm running for governor to offer you a different choice, a better way. When I was elected as Maine's first independent state treasurer, I stopped campaigning and transitioned to governing. Instead of picking fights and going tit for tat with Governor LePage, I collaborated with him and lawmakers in both parties to put Maine's financial house in order. We were successful in part because I was at the table, leveraging my experience and independence to unite Republicans and Democrats. Together, we improved transparency, accountability, and discipline in Maine's finances. I'm seeking your vote to become Maine's next governor and campaigning on my proven track record of fiscal responsibility and collaborative problem solving. I want you to know exactly what kind of chief executive I will be. We deserve better. We deserve a leader who talks straight, tells you the truth, puts people over partisanship, and rolls up her sleeves to get the job done. That's why, as governor, I will continue to work with Republicans and Democrats, this time around common goals to lower healthcare costs, prepare students for jobs of today and tomorrow, make Maine the best place in the country to work, and keep our state safe, beautiful, and prosperous for our children and grandchildren. Because Maine's next governor must have a vision for the future that extends beyond the polls and beyond the performance of their party in the next election, my signature priority as governor will be to unite Maine behind a long-range, comprehensive economic development plan that will help all Mainers prosper and thrive. We will use fact-based data and invite everyone to the table. That includes lawmakers, policy experts, and citizens from across the political spectrum and across our great state. A Hayes administration will roll out the long-range plan at the beginning of 2020, Maine's bicentennial anniversary of statehood, and everyone will have an opportunity to play a crucial role in making Maine work. I'm not naive about the difficult times in which we live and the challenge of fixing a broken political system, but I have hope, and I have confidence that Maine voters will see this election as I do, an opportunity to acknowledge that no one group of people in Maine has all the answers. And how we do things matters, and we can do this better by thinking differently and voting differently on November 6th. I'm Terry Hayes, and I want to earn your vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So to begin, the organizers have come up with 3 initial questions, and we'll begin with those. And the candidates will answer the questions, have an opportunity to answer the questions with 2 minutes each, beginning with Alan, and then Terry, and then Janet. So our first question for you is, if you were to be elected governor, how would you use your leadership as governor to break log jams in the legislature? And if you can you give an example? And we're thinking it'll be more efficient for you to stay at the, yeah, if that's all right. And you can use the lovely microphones, yes. Okay. They should be hot, yep.
Does that come off my 2 minutes?
No, your 2 minutes will start when you start speaking.
The greatest change that we have to make in this election is from a governor that thinks only his ideas matter, that all the right ideas are the ones he has, and that even his leaders in his own party don't matter. This governor had a Republican House and Senate in the first 2 years and didn't even coordinate with his own team. We have had years of division, anger, wreckage, insults. I tell you that although there's a lot of crowing about how great everything has been in the last 8 years, it is not great relative to what we could have done. I think we need a style of leadership that is clear in what it wants to do, has a vision, has a plan, but has enough humility to be willing to listen to and solicit the advice of people across the aisle. And not only across the aisle, across the spectrum. The last 5 or 6 years, I've been assembling large gatherings around the state to focus on the issues that are critical to Maine's future. And I've had in those gatherings Chamber of Commerce leaders, environmental leaders, labor leaders, community leaders, religious people, the entire spectrum of what Maine is. And I can tell you from those events, people are hungry for positive, constructive, forward-moving leadership that has a plan. And that's what I'm offering in this race.
And Terry.
Thank you. My answer to this question is what drove me to make the leap into this race to start with. I'm truly concerned, based on the history that Alan just described, that if we elect a partisan in 2018, we lock ourselves into the contentiousness that's become our policy work in Augusta. Janet mentioned the state shutdown last summer. Can any of you remember what that was about? Okay. And now we have a legislature that should have adjourned in April and it just adjourned this week in mid-September. That's the partisan gridlock. What will be different with my administration? The executive branch won't be at war with the legislative branch. That's been the circumstance for the past 6 years. The legislature will elect their leadership within 2 weeks of November 6th. I intend to meet with each, as your governor-elect, I intend to meet with each of the individuals that are elected by their caucuses, to have a conversation with them one-on-one about what their priorities are for the coming 2 years and share mine and invite them to collaborate so that we all can be successful. You know, everyone who runs for office in Maine has a love for Maine at the core. That's why they do it. And we lose that when we divide up into teams. And someone who doesn't agree with us, didn't vote the way we wanted, we're supposed to approach them as our enemy. I do not want to live in a Maine that has that construct for our policy work. I recognize that sometimes I'll agree with Representative Alley and sometimes I won't, but I don't have to hate him because he sees an issue differently than I do. And that's not the Maine I want to live in. So I intend to lead by every day inviting the other elected policy makers to the table to work collaboratively so we can get outcomes for those of you that are paying the bills. Thank you.
Janet Mills.
Thank you. Is this on? Yeah. I'm pleased to report that I'm working right now with Republicans, Independents, and Democrats and people across the state to build an economic action plan that we will be rolling out in the next couple of weeks, and to build a health care plan that we'll be rolling out as well. I'm doing this, with input across the board. I don't care what party somebody is a member of. If they have a good idea, I want to do that. I want to take those ideas and implement them, put them into action. I have a history of doing that, by the way. I served for 6 years in the Maine legislature, part-time gig, all the while working full-time in the private sector. For 4 of those years, I was on the Appropriations Committee. It was during the recession of 2008, 2009, those terrible years, some of the worst years of Maine's economy. We got 7 consensus budgets done in those 4 years. We did it by working across the aisle. We had to, we wanted to, for the sake of the people. We did not shut down state government. At that time, we did not have a governor who ruled by veto. The current governor has issued more than 600 vetoes. That's why there's stalemate and stagnation and paralysis sometimes in the legislature, because he doesn't respect the people who serve in that legislature. And Mr. Moody apparently wants to do the same, because he has said several times that he wants to be a third term of Paula Page. I'm anxious to get in there, open the doors of government, invite the people in, get public policy done the old-fashioned way by working across the aisle, inviting people to the table. If I'm privileged to become the governor of the state of Maine come January, you will find in my office an open door, an open mind, and an open heart. I guarantee it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next question, which will begin with Terry Hayes, this reflects actually a couple of questions that have come up among audience questions as well, is what solutions might you, if you're elected governor, apply to redress the unique challenges faced by Washington County and Maine's other rural areas?
Thank you again. You know, as I looked at this question, we got several of these in advance and had a chance to really contemplate. And what it gave me pause to think about what are the assets in Washington County and how are we tapping into those, and what's the partnership like between Washington County and the state. And there are a number of assets here that we are well aware of. There's significant positive leadership. People that have been in the county forever, who are committed, working year after year in a variety of hats on, that I think are really important to recognize. But there are some natural resource attributes that we have here in Washington County, but we've had some significant challenges with the relationship, from what I could see, between Washington County and the state. As your governor, I want to be your partner, not your parent. I don't want to be making decisions that flow from the governor's office down, but that take into account what are the priorities here. Is the rail line to the Deepwater Port in Eastport at the top of the list in terms of economic development? Is it continued public investment in broadband and expanding broadband and cellular service? Is it further investment in the public school system, pre-K to 12? I know you have assets in the community college and the university campus here. You know, what's at the top of the list for the people who live in Washington County? And then let's talk about how the state can support that piece, starting there and then working our way down the list. But I think it's a matter of you folks deciding for the state what's the highest priority, instead of me deciding what we should do for Washington County. I want to decide what's the best way for the state to move forward with Washington County, and with much of that of your preferences driving how we go about that. Thank you.
And Janet Mills.
Thank you. Let me be specific. First, we're going to fix Route 1 south of Calais. Second, we're going to do Medicaid expansion for all counties. Thirdly, we're going to work with Axiom Technologies and other good folks to expand broadband to the communities that don't already have it. I love the work that Susan Corbett and her organization have been doing in digital literacy and expanding broadband around the state of Maine. Thirdly, we're going to support the new Marine Research Center. Fourthly, we're going to support Healthy Acadia and its initiatives to supplement early childhood education. We're going to make sure that every child who has a Head Start available gets into Head Start. Only 30% of the children now eligible are in Head Start. We're going to do early childhood education and universal pre-K. We're going to support the CTEs and make sure that they are robust and training people for the jobs of the present, not just the jobs of the future. We're going to be thinking outside the box when it comes to things like taking old facilities, using brownfields money, and turning them into data warehouse centers that can also take advantage of the cold weather and the incredible bedrock that we have, and give off heat and energy. Combine that with geothermal and solar, and you've got a robust economy, the potential for incredible economy in rural areas in Maine. And finally, under my tenure, should I be privileged to be the governor come January, we will reopen the Down East Correctional Facility.
Alan Karen.
These are all the things that have to be done. I said earlier, the list of demands on us as a state are growing because the economy isn't, and we're getting older. If you follow those trend lines a little further ahead, we'll have more people who need more programs and fewer people who are paying the bills. That is a catastrophic danger to Maine. So I agree with everything that Janet just said. The question really becomes, how are we going to pay for these things? Any one of us can drive to Machias and promise to you a laundry list, a Christmas wish list of the things we're going to do. And we're doing this all up and down the state, by the way, on issue after issue after issue. Somebody's going to have to tabulate this at some point and say, where does the money come from? I don't want you to misunderstand. I'm in favor of all of these things. And broadband I've worked on for a long time, many other issues. But there are very few ways to add revenue to state government. They really come down to three. You can raise taxes, you can grow the economy, and you can cut government. I want us to think about that. I am opposed, and I think most people are, to raising taxes. We're taxed about as high as we can stand as a percentage of our income, higher than almost any rural state in the country. I'm in favor of streamlining and modernizing government. We can save something there, we can do better. But ultimately, we have to find a way. The conversation we have to have is not what can I have, but what can we do together to build the next economy? And if we don't have that conversation, we're going to run out of time.
So our next question will begin with Janet Mills. And the question is, if you were elected to be governor, what would your priorities be for stemming the opioid crisis?
Oh boy, do you have an hour? I published a 10-point plan back in January in the Bangor Daily News. And I keep revisiting it and adding to it. On my website, you'll find a detailed position paper on this. I've given it a great deal of thought. And not only have I given it thought, I've given it some action. When the current governor, whom Mr. Moody supports, vetoed the bills that would allow Narcan to be dispensed over the counter, saying that Narcan doesn't save lives, it merely postpones death. I was appalled at that callous attitude toward Maine people. So I drew down some pharmaceutical settlement monies. I bought a room full of Narcan. And with that Narcan, I've given it out to 85 police departments across the state of Maine. I'm allowed to do that as a law enforcement officer. And with that Narcan alone, we have saved, as of last weekend, more than 524 lives. So I'm about getting the job done. Now I'm about also changing the triage that we do in the emergency rooms and the clinics. So when somebody comes and says, I've got a substance use disorder problem, I want treatment. Somebody comes into the ER with overdose, you provide medication-assisted treatment right there on the spot. Have people prescribing it. Call in a recovery coach to deal with that person then. Don't just shove them out the door again, back to where they came from so they can overdose again. Early childhood education, we've got to emphasize decision-making and life skills and identify those adverse childhood experiences that contribute to substance use disorder later in life. It's worth the investment at the early stages of education. A lot less expensive than pumping money into the secondary schools for those people who have been afflicted. There are a lot of things we can do. Lift the two-year moratorium, the limit on Suboxone and methadone for Medicaid patients. That is not based on any research or information that supports it. Those are some of the 10 things I've supported and proposed.
Thank you. And next, Alan.
I've lost 3 nephews in the last 6 or 7 years, one to opiates, one to suicide, and one to murder. All of those losses were tied to the very same thing, which is a loss of hope. a loss of hope. This is the great disease we have in large parts of Maine right now. It expresses itself in lots of different ways. Opiates, alcohol, self-destructive behavior, you name it. So I'm going to again say we have to focus on the roots of these problems, which are almost always attached to the health of our economy. Now, if we had a robust, growing economy, it doesn't mean we wouldn't have an opiates problem or we wouldn't have an alcohol problem. We would. But those problems would be diminishing rather than growing. So these are all symptoms of something else. Now, this issue is a perfect illustration of how dysfunctional government has become. One party insisted that we had to do more law enforcement and we weren't going to do anything else. The other party insisted we need more services. And to their credit, that party at least was willing to collaborate. We essentially lost time in this senseless argument about which party would win. And I'm going to agree with Terry with something she said. What is the great skill of political parties today? What is their great skill? Blocking the other party. Not coming up with ideas, not coming up with plans, not finding common ground, not being hopeful, blocking the other party. And unless we break that habit, it's going to get worse because we can't get anything done.
And Terry Hayes.
That took 5 years. It took 5 years to get a meaningful piece of legislation around the opioid crisis out of Augusta. And not because there weren't people who had good ideas, but because of the problem Alan just described. And again, electing another partisan in 2018 just aligns us up for that same type of competition again, which isn't about solving problems, it's about holding back the other guys, as opposed to seeing us all as Mainers. As your next governor, I'm most concerned about changing the stigma and the judgment that's attached to substance use disorder. It's hard to have empathy with people that you don't think are worthy. I think everyone is worthy. Our current administration does not. Sees substance use as a moral failure. It's a disease, and we need to approach it as a disease, as a public health crisis, and that means we're going to have to put state money into solving the problem, and we have not done that yet. There's not been a significant appropriation as part of our general fund budget to deal with this. That's another reason why it has taken so long to get any kind of traction. So we're going to expand Medicaid? Absolutely. We know we need to do that. There's a very small minority of Mainers that have been holding that back. That's going to happen in 2019, and some of those monies, additional monies, we can use to help battle this scourge that's attacking our families, our friends, and our neighbors. I just want you to recognize, again, partisanship is the reason it's gotten so bad, because we've known it's had to be both law enforcement and treatment, and education, and access. All of those things are part of the solution, and we haven't been able to move the ball forward because of the partisanship in Augusta. We can keep doing things the same way, or we can make a change. This is an opportunity for a change.
Great, thank you. So now we're going to move on to audience questions, and we have many questions, so I'm going to merge questions that regard the same topic. And one topic is the Down East Correctional Facility, as you all know, is very important to the region. And so we have two questions that are related that essentially ask when DECF reopens, there's an implication that it will reopen. How will you improve chances for inmates to better improve them, to better themselves, and how will you redress the harm that's come to the staff at DECF and trauma and disrespect, as it's worded here? And then we'll begin with Alan Karen. Yes.
Oh, let's try that again. I have one of the most interesting biographies, probably for any major candidate for office, certainly in my lifetime. I already mentioned some of it to you. I dropped out of school in the 9th grade, and I built 2 businesses. And I had a master's degree from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, but I didn't tell you that I went straight there from the 9th grade with a bunch of years in between. So I didn't have the advantage of coming to a place like UMM. The other thing I did was spend 8 months. I spent 8 months in Harvard, and I also spent 8 months in the Men's Correctional Center in Windham. So I have seen Maine from the bottom, and I have worked with some of the top CEOs and political leaders in the state. I've seen it from the top. And so when I'm asked the question about corrections, when I got out of that place, I went right to work helping the families of prisoners to visit their families. I help people in county jails get GEDs. And so this is not an abstract question for me. I said in a forum we did on counties just yesterday or the day before, it's all a blur at some point, jails need to be close to people. And so if you have somebody in the correctional center from this part of the state, you cannot have their families traveling 100 miles or 200 miles to visit them. That will undercut their opportunity to correct themselves and find a new path. So I'm very passionate about this issue. I cannot explain to you, and I expect you can't explain to me, why this decision was made to close this facility. It made no sense to me, and if any of you have a sensible explanation for why it happened, I'd love to know it. It's not going to happen under my administration.
Terry Hayes.
I'm a very different kind of leader than our current governor. And the tail end of your question asked about how would I deal with the harm, and the trauma, and the disrespect to employees. I have immense respect for every state employee. I am a state employee. You pay my salary. I know the people, Claudette, when she comes in to empty my rubbish every day and greets me and says hello, right down to the Capitol security when I forget my pass card and need to get them to let me in. Everybody that goes to work, they get up every day, we get the best person they have to offer us that day, and we need to appreciate them, and we don't do that by eliminating their positions in the dark of night. I was appalled when I heard of the governor's decision, the way it was implemented. I know there had been conversation, there had been legislation, it was still actively being considered. As your governor, I'm not going to treat the state employees that way, and I'm not going to treat you that way either. These are decisions that impact more than just the chief executive. They impact the entire county, not just the employees, but the businesses that depended on services to the prison, and some, as I understand it, that prisoners were on work release and were being relied on in the community. It was destructive, it was mean. That is not how I lead. I can tell you that we need to look at this systemically and make sure that we're making decisions in a way that benefit all of us and that we understand them. We won't always agree with them, but we should be able to understand them, and they should be implemented in a way that is respectful. Who wants to work for us when we treat our employees that way? We're competing for talent across the economy right now. I will tell you that I will respect state employees, and we will work hard to earn their trust back under my administration. Thank you.
And Janet Mills.
Thank you. I think you know where I stand. I've had the honor of meeting with dozens of people who worked at DCF, some of whom are now commuting 2.5 hours to go to work at the Charleston facility. And I've had the privilege of hearing from people who were inmates at the facility, many of whom were more than 200 miles away from their homes, but they loved it there because they felt worthwhile, because they were learning a trade, because they were contributing to society, contributing to local businesses like Worcester Wreath and so many others. The businesses liked it. The community appreciated it. And in my first budget in January, the money will be there. I took the governor to court, and the court found that what he did was illegal. Then the legislature failed, because of the governor's veto, to fund the $4.5 million to keep that facility operational. It will be funded in my first budget, and we will meet again with those honored employees, corrections guards, cooks, and everyone who worked there, and we'll bring them back to work if they are still available. And while there were only 50 inmates at the time that the facility was closed, we'll bring back 120, 150, whatever the capacity is, and whatever the capacity of the community is. These people were earning their keep. They were paying room and board. Don't tell me it costs $5 million a year to run. That doesn't make sense. I got emails from inmates who were saying, this is the first time in my life that I have ever felt worthwhile as a human being. That is extremely important, and it's the fiscally responsible thing to do, the humane thing to do, the right thing to do to bring back that facility.
Thank you. And the next pair of questions is in reference to jobs, and I'll just read them, and we'll begin with Terry Hayes. The first reads, rural counties are losing professionals, doctors, dentists, and lawyers. Can anything be done for it? And also, how do you propose to have more jobs come to this area? Medium security prison or nursing home, how can you help in this regard? Terry Hayes.
Well, I'll start with the third example first, when you asked about nursing homes. Medicaid expansion is a significant challenge that we need to undertake and get underway. But the other thing, the piece of that program, with the Medicare program that's serving most of our seniors that are living in nursing homes, is that the cost of the nursing home care and the reimbursement rates don't come together. There's a significant gap between the costs and what in fact the folks are being paid and those institutions are being paid. We just closed down a 128-bed nursing home in West Paris, precisely because of that gap, because there was so much money that was being lost and the institution couldn't make the money up. And all of those residents had to be placed, many of them still within about 30 miles, but it was a crisis for the families of those people. So when we look at that, we look at if we can close that gap, we will have more people, we will have more opportunities for the elderly to be able to stay closer to home. Growing rural jobs is really interesting because that's where most of our micro businesses are. Finding out what's in the way of those businesses that already exist that are preventing them from growing and helping them grow is a significant part of it. The initiative that's been underway for the last 2 years within our forest products industry has a lot of promise to it, particularly that will impact rural Maine. Just looking at reinventing what value-added products we're doing with our natural resources. And there's a team of folks that have been working on that, as I said, for over 18 months. I look forward to championing the work that they're doing and helping raise the awareness of it by using my role as Maine's governor to applaud those opportunities that exist. We've invested some significant funds already in some of the assets in Washington County. I mentioned the port earlier. I think we can develop that more if we look at the rail line, but again, I need folks here to tell me what's at the top of your list. Where do you want to start? And let's meet there and move from that point down the list. Thank you.
Next is Janet Mills.
Thank you. First, we're going to look at the infrastructure needs of the communities. Here in Washington County, we're going to take on Verizon, make sure they supply good and reasonably priced cell phone coverage to the good people of Washington County. And we're going to take on the broadband challenge in all the rural communities. And I'm proposing something akin to broadband districts, hubs where we can have co-working spaces with good fiber connectivity, where people can come and telecommute or create businesses, entrepreneurs, local people who can expand their businesses through co-working spaces and good broadband connectivity. Thirdly, jobs. Job training for teachers and nurses is sorely lacking. We're about 60% of the nursing population in Maine is eligible for retirement in the next few years. Need to expand on loan forgiveness programs and allow people to teach and provide nursing profession to the underserved areas across our state. And we need to increase teacher pay. The minimum teacher pay now is $30,000. That's got to go to at least $40,000 to encourage equity across the counties, across the regions, and provide opportunity zones for people to have loan forgiveness programs. I'm thinking even of an income tax forgiveness program for those who stay in underserved areas, who graduate from schools here in Maine and stay in Maine and provide those jobs that are so needed. It was a shame to read just a few years ago that the Lubeck nursing home had to close. Medicaid expansion will address many of those problems, and reviewing reimbursement rates for those nursing homes in such dire need will help keep homes closer to home so seniors and others can age and be rehabilitated close to their homes. That's a tragic circumstance when those homes, like the one in Lubeck, have to close.
Thank you. The next question. Oh, no, sorry. Ask Mr. Moody.
Let Sean speak.
Sorry, Alan Karen. Did you answer that question yet?
Didn't I start that question?
Oh, Terry, Janet.
How are we going to help rural Maine? Yeah.
Microphone?
No, the microphone, yeah. Sunday night, we've been doing this all week. The average income in southern Maine is about $70,000, $72,000. Anybody know the average income in this county? Can anybody? Yeah, it's low 40s, around there somewhere, right? You're not going to fix that problem with programs. Yeah, household income, sorry. So we got to figure out how to build an economy that equalizes those things. We have not done that. We haven't even begun to do that. You know, we just endured a presidential campaign in which one of the candidates, who shall remain unnamed, promised to bring back coal. And he had no more power to bring back coal than you and I do. Where I come from, for 50 years, politicians have come through and said, we will bring back the mills. Maybe you heard something different. We will bring back farming. I suspect here you've heard, we're going to deliver a lot of stuff. We're going to give you a lot of stuff. And so you have to ask yourself whether that's worked for you. I don't think it has. I don't think it's worked for lots of Maine. Look, I've been talking about the economy a lot, and people now are sort of working on an economic plan. I've been working on an economic plan for Maine since 2006, when I brought the Brookings Institution up here, and we went all around the state, and I spoke in 130 different communities, including this one, about how we build a new prosperity in Maine. We got to get to it. I've now produced this book with 15 of the best thinkers in the state of Maine on how to grow a new prosperity. I'm going to give you the crib notes before we're done, but you can find it online. We need a new conversation in Maine about how we're going to grow a new economy here.
Thank you. Now on to the next question. And this will begin with Janet Mills. Would you support raising the gasoline tax to improve our roads or taking some other measure to do so? Please elaborate.
Great question, and one of the toughest questions, because I hope to see many more electric vehicles and hybrids on the roads in Maine, because, you know, 50% of our carbon footprint is from transportation, modes of transportation. We have a deal with Volkswagen of America, a settlement with them. The governor has his hands on more than $20 million of a settlement that should go to charging stations and subsidizing, I hope, the purchase of electric vehicles such as vans to transport people in nonprofit senior centers and that kind of thing. But the more electric vehicles, such as they have in Canada, the less gas tax, that is, less gas tax revenue. So there's a quandary there. I think we've got to look to see what other states and other countries are doing to measure what your usage, your road usage, and have a different way of charging for that usage. And I don't have the solution, I don't have a magic wand, but we know that the gas tax revenues are going to go down with the increase in electric vehicles and hybrids. So it's a problem, and I don't think we can solve it by simply increasing the gas tax. So the simple answer to the question is probably not.
And Alan Karen.
I'll avoid a direct answer also because it is a very tough question. I said earlier, I'm not in favor of raising taxes. This transportation thing is a ticking time bomb for us, folks. All across the world right now, the major automobile manufacturers are gearing up for heavy production of electric vehicles in the next 5 years. And so the market share of electric vehicles, never mind hybrids, electric vehicles, which don't use any gasoline, are going to grow as a percentage of the fleet exponentially after 5 years from now. So the whole formula we've had, I'm repeating what Janet said in some ways, because it's the fact. The whole mechanism we've had for supporting and sustaining the transportation network is going away. It will not work. None of us want to hear anything about raised taxes on anything. I get it. My wife ran a statewide campaign in Massachusetts a few years ago to raise the gas tax and to index it to inflation. Perfectly sensible idea. And it got killed because people want to pay less wherever they can. They'd like you to keep all the roads and services up, but they'd like to pay as little as they possibly could. So we've got a huge dilemma. We better figure it out. Because if you think the roads are bad now, fast forward 10 years. Again, we're not going to have the money unless we change the way we do things. And this is exhibit number 1. And I'm very worried about it. And so raising the gas tax is the last alternative, but it cannot be off the table.
Terry Hayes.
I would reinstate or advocate for reinstating the indexing that was attached to the gas tax previously so that it floats. Because I think we have to recognize that that is one form of a user tax, and that's really the direction we need to be going. Representative Andrew McLean, who's the House Chair of the Transportation Committee, in collaboration with Representative Perry from Southern Maine, the Arundel area, have collaborated and look at alternatives and what other means might we use to determine usage based on mileage, for example. I mean, even though you're driving an electric vehicle, you still need the roads to be upkept. So maybe there's some way of taxing the electricity. There's some way what we can find ways. Think of the smart meter that's in your house. Your car knows how many miles it's driven in a year. I've got a car that I think is smarter than me right now. It has an alarm or a warning for everything. Finding ways, it's usage. If I drive more than you drive, I should probably be paying more because I'm using more of the roads. And let me tell you, I'm probably driving more than you are, at least for the last 18 months, okay? But we have got to shift the paradigm because the gas tax is insufficient. Adjusting it or putting the indexing back on will help. I think that's part of the solution. But as Alan described, we're moving away from that as a fuel source, so there's no way we're going to be able to maintain our roads and our infrastructure. We have to look at other sources. Toll roads. Turnpike isn't having this problem right now. They have another way of doing a user fee around that. There are a number of suggestions, as I said, that are under consideration in the legislature that haven't gone anywhere, in large part because the current administration doesn't have to deal with this. It's going to be kicking the can down the road. So you can expect that I would suggest, yes, returning to the indexing, but also looking at a broader array of usage based on usage and mileage. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is, and we'll begin with Alan Karen, how would you push back against tariffs hurting Maine's lobster industry?
Everybody hear the question. I think what we're doing on trade right now is horrible. Now, I agree that we, in many cases, could and should negotiate tougher agreements. And there are many cases where we have to really get tough. But I think the overall trend coming out of Washington right now is frightening economically. And we haven't seen the effects of that yet, but we will. The reason why we haven't seen the effects of it is we're right now living in a major, what I call a sugar high, after massive tax cuts in Washington, which have driven the deficit within 1 year will be $1 trillion. It's over $900 million, $900 billion right now. That's the deficit since that tax cut. So we're living on a sugar high. Everything's great right now. It's a little like, woohoo, we're gonna go on a cruise. Wait, you're spending your rent money. Yeah, but we're living good. We're spending our rent money right now, and our children are gonna pay for it. And maybe even their children are gonna pay for it. So I got off the track on the tariffs, but we have to have people who fight for fairness and for our side. I am not in favor of these massive new tariffs that are being imposed. But just today we heard maybe another round of tariffs on China. Woohoo, we're gonna sock it to China. Won't that be great? Unless you're trying to sell them lobsters. All this stuff's gonna come back to bite us because it's politics, not economics, that are driving it.
Terry Hayes.
I think there are two very specific things that I would look to as your governor under these circumstances, assuming that the current posture in Washington continues. And the first is coordinating with our federal delegation, because those are the folks who are in Washington on a regular basis making that case. And we're particularly vulnerable in terms of our lobster industry because there aren't other states that rely on it that have had as much success as Maine has had with our lobster industry. That's the first piece. The second piece is when we don't control that outcome, we look for new markets. So who else wants our lobster? Are we looking to sell it to countries that we're not having this kind of a trade war with? Because there are significant parts of the globe where we're not fighting with them over imports and exports and tariffs. So where else might we find a use and a desire for our lobster catch? And how do we cultivate that? It's working with the lobster industry. There's a significant marketing effort within that industry. But we have to recognize there are some things over which we have input but not control. But there are other places where we have much more control. And I would say we need to get creative and look at marketing our product beyond the shores of those countries that we are currently in a trade war with. We don't know how long this trade war is going to last, how deeply it's going to go. So how do we operate outside of it? That's my suggestion, and I look forward to working with those in the lobster industry to help implement it.
And Janet Mills.
Thank you. Look, I'm fine with supporting the administration in Washington when it does something beneficial that helps Maine people, such as creating an infrastructure program and funding the rebuilding of our roads and bridges and broadband infrastructure. That would be wonderful. When it does something I don't agree with and it's not in the interest of Maine people, I will stand up to them. I've shown that I will stand up to them. I've stood up to the administration in Washington when it comes to denuding the Clean Power Plan, to trying to roll back the mercury and airborne toxics rules, the ozone rules, the CAFE standards, all those things. I've stood up to them on health care and education and many other issues. I stood up to Betsy DeVos and won a case the other day where she has tried to ignore the perils of student debt and support private for-profit colleges that take money from students and get them into courses that don't benefit them. But in this area, 80% of our lobster exports to China, 80% of our lobster exports are to China. We've lost 28% of our exports in July alone because of this irresponsible trade war that this administration has started. Without the consent of the Congress, without the consent of the governed, I will work with the delegation in Washington. I will meet regularly with all 4 members of the congressional delegation, whatever party they may be, and cooperate with them in standing up to the administration in Washington when it does things that are not in the benefit, not to the benefit of Maine people, because that's what I've done before, standing up for Maine people as district attorney, as a legislator, in the private sector, and as your attorney general. I'll continue to do that as your governor.
Thank you. Our next question will begin with Terry Hayes. Please describe in detail the changes you would put in place that would improve the conditions and capacities faced by the many micro-entrepreneurs in Washington County.
I'm going to start with what I know basically from data that's been collected statewide from businesses that aren't just micro entrepreneurs, but those that have even some larger businesses. And the biggest headwind that they face is the cost of healthcare and health insurance. And there's a couple of different ideas that we've been floating around that have to be part of a comprehensive look at how we attract businesses and workers to Maine, because we need both. We need skilled people to take up openings and positions that we can't fill right now, and we also need people who are willing to come here and start businesses. So who are the least expensive people to insure? Children. They're probably not starting micro businesses. But look at folks between the ages of 26 and 35. That's where the energy and the interest often comes for entrepreneurial spirit. And those are folks who no longer can qualify for their parents' coverage, and they have difficulty buying into the exchange when they're not generating enough revenue because they're at that startup stage. So let's look at offering them health insurance, so long as that is in fact their intent, so that we're taking that one most significant barrier and covering them for that time period so that they can focus their energies on their idea, on their entrepreneurial spirit, generating the business from their creativity and then expanding to employ others. I mean, these are businesses that support 1, 2, 5 families in general. So I'm looking at a strategy that would allow us to take that one biggest barrier out of the way and provide it for those folks with some caveats, obviously, because the intent is not that anybody can come to Maine and get free health insurance, but we want to take the biggest barrier and address it so that we can encourage folks that have that type of creativity. Thank you.
Thanks. Janet Mills.
Thank you. I agree. Healthcare is one of the biggest costs, biggest problems and challenges. The Chamber of Commerce agreed by surveying 1,000 of the businesses across the state of Maine, and they all said that the cost of healthcare and health insurance is their biggest priority, their biggest challenge. They agreed that Medicaid expansion is a good first step, a major step towards reducing insurance costs, because Medicaid expansion will reduce the cost shift that results from uncompensated care to the tune of $570 million in 1 year alone recently that the hospitals and providers had to absorb, passing it on to those of us who are lucky enough to have insurance or those who self-pay. That will be reduced by Medicaid expansion. I'm looking at also at a public option proposal, maybe working in tandem with Vermont and New Hampshire, looking at addressing the high cost of pharmaceuticals, which is also driving the cost of health care. In addition to health care, startup funding is important through loans and grants. Programs such as Maine Technology Institute, MTI, which we started funding when I was on the Appropriations Committee, does a good job applying the 7 program priorities, including aquaculture here in Washington County and agriculture. I think we can further fund that and support that effort, which helps entrepreneurs and small businesses. I think infrastructure improvements, I talked about cell phone coverage earlier, and broadband are so important to those who are going to start businesses and expand their businesses here. And that means infrastructure hubs, broadband hubs, And energy costs, we've got to address energy costs by incentivizing solar, geothermal, offshore wind, looking at that, and reducing energy costs for businesses and homes and all of us across the state of Maine.
Thank you. Ellen Karen.
I mentioned this book a minute ago. I don't make a penny on this book, so I'm not pitching it for that reason. It's called Maine's Next Economy. And the subtitle is How the State's Innovators, Entrepreneurs, and Doers Are Growing a New Prosperity. It's not about something we can do tomorrow. It's about something that's already happening in Maine. Some of it's happening here. Others are happening all across the state. The essence of this idea is quite simple. Stop trying to lure big companies to come to Maine by writing blank checks. Stop doing it. It's been a dismal failure as a strategy for growth for half a century. Instead, take the machinery of government and tax breaks and loan guarantees, all the things that we do to try to grow jobs. By the way, all of us together invest close to $500 million a year in incentives for jobs, to attract jobs. Here's what I say. Let's grow jobs here. Take the resources, take all of the power of state government and point it to the little guys. They're in every community. They're in every county across the state. This is who we are. This is who Mainers have been for 400 years. We are innovators. We are entrepreneurs. We are resourceful. The government needs to get behind the little guys. And by the way, the fastest growing part of the economy in the last 15 to 20 years has been what? Small-scale agriculture. It did it with no help from state government because state government could not pick a winner in the economy if its life depended on it and shouldn't even try. They did it, they bootstrapped themselves. That's the kind of economy we need.
Thank you. The next question will begin with Janet Mills. Washington County small blueberry growers are expected to be extinct by 2022. What will you do to save this ecosystem?
Oh, wow, great question. Look, I'm very fond of the delicious, beneficial, and tasty low-bush blueberries, the small blueberries that are grown here. I think it's a shame that they are being crushed by competition from other countries, growers in Canada, Peru, and Chile, where they are subsidizing their product, and it's not as good a product. Our blueberries here in Washington County have twice as much antioxidants as blueberries in other areas. Where's Marie Emerson? Blueberry lady. I think we've got to get together with the congressional delegation and try to reinforce and help our blueberry industry, help support it at every level, and make sure we market it in full force and make sure people know what a great product it is. Look, if I'm privileged to be governor come January, I want to be the recruiter in chief when it comes to small businesses and entrepreneurs and young families moving here. I want to be the promoter in chief when it comes to promoting our brand and our people, the best work ethic in the world, the best natural resources in the world. And I want to be the closer in chief when it comes to cutting deals. Not saying 1 month that we're going to do this contract and the next month pulling the rug out from under Statoil or Aquaventus or whatever entity it is we cut a deal with. We're going to stop that. We're going to be good for our word. When it comes to blueberries, they're going to be on the table in the Blaine House come January. Our precious low-bush blueberries.
Alan Karen.
Well, I think one thing we could do that would help, and I don't think we can promise to save or expand this industry. One thing we could do is start sending a different signal to the country. We have been sending the worst possible signal to America in the last 6 or 8 years that we could dream up. We've told the country that this is a bad place, that it's a stupid place, that it's a corrupt place, that teachers are a dime a dozen. The list goes on and on and on. I've likened this to running a restaurant and having a sign in the window that says, "Come on in, folks. Food's fine." We've had some, problems with the food and illness, and the wait staff is very rude. Please seat yourself. And what do you think happens? Nobody comes in. Maine has one of the most powerful brands in the country. It's a brand that makes people feel good. It's wholesome. It's dependable. It's trustworthy. It's quality. We built this brand over many years, and we can destroy it in a very short period of time if we're not careful. So many things a governor cannot promise. They can promise, but they cannot then deliver. I can promise this to you. The tone will change the first moment I'm in office. The message that we send to the country will focus on what we're great at and the quality of our products, not on what our problems are. And so I think we've made a huge mistake. And those people like me who have worked on the economy understand how important, how valuable a brand is. We cannot do this anymore.
Terry Hayes.
Thank you. I noticed in the question, in the stem of the question, there was a real emphasis on the small blueberry growers, and I have to admit I'm not entirely sure what the distinction is. So I don't know size. I'm not sure whose question it was, but was it your question, dear?
577 small growers left. The prediction is they will exit the industry by
2022. So basically, we're talking about 4 years from now. That's the expectation.
And the acreage, like I'm a small blueberry grower and we have 64 acres.
Thank you. That's helpful as well. Go ahead.
There are 60,000 acres in the state of Maine. Most of it is located in Washington County.
That much I was aware of. But the specific challenge to the smaller growers, I'm less in tune, I guess, or less aware of. So if you could add some, go ahead.
Well, for example, as a small blueberry grower, I have to wait until December to get paid. So I don't know what I'm getting paid for my crop until December. But to also, the price has tanked in the past couple of years, and a lot of growers have actually gotten out of the business. They're letting their land grow up, or they're hoping, they're just going to maintain it for 10 years, hoping the price goes up then. Many of us have gotten into the fresh pack industry, selling fresh to local restaurants, local people, maybe even shipping into Canada and stuff, and we've done it all on our own. There has been no grants available, there has been no supplements or anything to help us through this. And actually, Maria, and asking this question is the first time I've heard anybody actually discuss what's happening to the small grower. I mean, there used to be quite a few of us, and it's getting pretty bad.
So my understanding is that there has been some collective effort around promoting the wild blueberry crop. I'm thinking David, whose last name won't come, Bell, maybe, is that the right? Had worked with Cooperative Extension, now he works for one of the larger processors, if I understand correctly. So there's been an effort to try to generate greater interest and grow the market. And I would assume that what we're talking about is, do we have some state funds to invest to help generate that market so that there's an ongoing demand, because the demand has diminished over time? Okay.
It's pretty bad when you go to your local store during the month of August and they're selling high bush blueberries cheaper than the Maine wild ones. I mean, that's one problem. I mean, right here in Machias, the high bush
Right.
blueberries are $1.99 a pound, a pint, and then the Maine wild ones are $2.99 a pint. But like Elizabeth just mentioned, it costs approximately 35 cents a pound to break even, and a lot of growers got paid 21 last year. And the price is going down. Yeah.
the price that the growers is getting is going down, but the price that I'm paying at Hannaford and Turner for Maine blueberries is going through the roof. So that's the folks in the middle that are making the money. That's what I'm understanding. Looking at it systemically, it needs to be part of the conversation, because why is that happening? I don't know the answer, but I can understand the frustration and the concern that you've expressed about what's going to happen to the industry if we don't pay attention to it. So if it's specifically help with marketing, then we have folks that know how to do that and can help with that, because Alan's right, we have a good brand. It's a little tarnished. But the other piece that I would suggest is just what you just said about the price of the cultivated high bush that's next, in the same grocery store. How do we sell this to the consumers? How do we make sure that we can compete in our own grocery stores and with those processors that are using blueberries in the value-added products that they're making? So I appreciate the question, and thank you for filling in some of the blanks for me.
Thank you. So we're going to ask one more question before we take closing statements. And this is a combined question, and we'll begin with Alan, Karen. And the question is asking what, as governor, you would do for marginalized groups. And the specific groups mentioned included LGBTQ citizens, folks who use drugs or are addicted to drugs, and those with intellectual disabilities, and those who work with folks who do all those, who need their services.
This is part of a larger question to me of how we deal with people who are not in the mainstream. I've worked for a long time and have written many things. Some of you may know I wrote a weekly column in the Sunday Telegram for 5 years. You can go to that website and you can see what I've written about almost any one of these issues. So I start with immigration as a larger issue, and how desperately important it is that we throw the doors open to new people coming to Maine. We cannot survive economically unless we welcome new people. One of my supporters is Tim Sample. You've probably heard of him. Does a lot of great Down East comedy, and he and I have known each other since we were in our 20s. And I talked to him a couple of years ago when he was down in Freeport. I said, Tim, I love the comedy just as much as you do, but it's not so funny anymore talking about people from way in the way we did. Now, I grew up as a Franco-American. I told you my grandfather came here 100 years ago. He came here to face rallies by the KKK, opposed not to black people, but to Franco-Americans, Irish and Italians, so-called Papists. So we've had a strain of this not liking people from away for a long time and not liking people who are different. And so one of the jobs of the governor is to, I think, as a leader, is to help open these conversations up. And I'm getting 15 seconds pretty soon, aren't I? So I'm going to tell you this to give you an indication of who I am rather than go down the list of issues. About 20 years ago, I ran the first campaign for equal rights for gay people in the state of Maine. I was, I think, the only non-gay person in the country who ever ran a gay rights campaign, and I didn't do it to help me or anybody in my family. I did it because it was the right thing to do.
Thank you. Terry Hayes.
Thanks for the question. As I understood the list, there are many people who are left out of the mainstream for a variety of reasons, and some because they look different, some because they sound different. I think at the top of my list from Maine are the natives who were here when we got here and how we're treating them and how we've treated them, and the lack of a working relationship with our tribal neighbors that has broken down and gotten worse in the last 10 years. I'm very concerned about that, and I think the way we treat our tribal neighbors affects every other part, every other group that we encounter. I mean, we are the immigrants relative to those neighbors of ours, and I'm concerned that we have that from an official perspective, we have marginalized them. They're the invisibles. I would like very much to change that. I'm still learning how our history, relatively recent history, cemented that perspective and that marginalization, because I need to understand that better in order to effect a change with it. But I'm very interested in working with the tribal leadership to bring them back to the table so that as we're making policy decisions, their interests are integrated into that conversation. I think it's essential. And frankly, I would encourage you to judge my administration based on how well we do that. I think that becomes the barometer. Thank you.
Thank you. And Janet Mills.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, let me retrieve it. I will endeavor to answer the question because I put all my questions down there. The question was essentially how you would address supporting marginalized groups, and the groups mentioned included LGBTQ citizens, folks who use drugs or are addicted to drugs, and citizens with intellectual disabilities.
Wow, I mean, it's really three different questions. There are different things you would do for each of those groups of people, and I would not want to marginalize any group of people. I think we need to have open arms to all folks who want to live and work and play in Maine. We need more people to move here. We need people to be here. I think it takes a change of attitude, a change in policy. We've got to be more open-minded. And when it comes to tribal relations, I think I'm the only one here, only one of the candidates who has a position paper on my website regarding tribal relations, regarding using the MITSIC, the Maine Indian Tribal State Commission, expanding its role to be part of the dispute resolution process, so we don't end up in litigation for years and years over things that could be resolved by talking to one another instead of filing suits. I've talked about meeting regularly with tribal leaders and with the tribal councils, and I've been doing that, been meeting with members of the tribes, and it concerns me that the Passamaquoddy tribe, for instance, is losing so much money in its blueberry operation. I don't think they even picked blueberries last year or this year. They didn't cultivate, they didn't engage in it, and for many years it was a profit-making endeavor on their part, and it's saddens me that they're not able to succeed. We should share in the reinvigorating of that enterprise for their behalf, on their behalf, and for the behalf of other blueberry growers in this area. We can work with the tribes, for instance, in doing other kinds of economic development as they see the need and making sure that they prosper like the rest of our citizens can prosper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll give the candidates each 2 minutes for a closing statement, and we'll begin with Terry Hayes, then Janet Mills, and Alan Karen, and I'll invite you to come to the podium if you'd like.
Again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here this evening. Rebecca, especially you, because you've been very diligent. The rest of you can't see her, but she is right on top of it, making sure we don't overuse the time allotted to us. This election is an opportunity for us to acknowledge that no one group of Mainers has all the right answers, that problems aren't partisan, and that solutions shouldn't be either. I'm running for governor to offer you a better choice, an experienced, independent, and courageous problem solver, someone beholden to you, the Maine people, not to party leaders, special interests, or wealthy campaign contributors. This is my opportunity to share with you I am a clean elections candidate. I'm grateful to the voters of Maine for supporting that program twice at the polls. And if once we're done, you haven't made a $5 qualifying contribution and you would like to, my husband Steve is here with me today and he will happily help you out with that. Thank you. If we can get it right when it comes to the community, the environment, and the economy, we're going to have a place where our children can stay, work, and raise their own families. The path is lit for us. We just have to decide to walk it together. I'm Terry Hayes. I ask for your vote for governor on November 6th. And remember, together, we can do this better. Thank you.
Next is Janet Mills.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming here and participating. And I hope the audience is much wider than what's here in person, because I know that the issues we're talking about are serious, that the challenges facing Washington County and the other rim counties in particular are extraordinarily serious. When I think about, and people ask me, why am I running for governor? I think about the poet Mary Oliver, who posed the question to all of us when she said, "What is it you wish to do with this one wild and precious life of yours?" I know that I have the time and the energy and the vision to do this job, that the time is now, the place is now, that I can turn this state in a new direction. I've been privileged to run an executive agency with a $42 million budget. I've managed people, I've managed budgets, I've done the state budget. I know how to turn the ship of state around. I'm a problem solver. I worked with the governor, by the way, in enacting a prescription drug, capping prescription drug program, a new law that is addressing the opiate epidemic in a different way. And I'm pleased to have worked across the aisle to do that. If you want to talk about working across the aisle, come to my Thanksgiving dinner. Come to my family dinner. I grew up in a Republican family, and I'm pleased to work with a lot of good Republicans and independents across this state in forging a new path for the state of Maine. I know that when Maine people see a problem, we don't wait for somebody else to fix it for us. We roll up our sleeves and we get it done ourselves, working together as a team. I know that and I'm running for governor because I know that the best chapter in our state's history has yet to be written. And I want to write it with all of you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening and watching, those of you who are watching this streamed. I ask for your vote. I ask for your energy, your passion, your ideas. Together we'll turn this state around and forge Washington County and the rest of the state, put us in a new direction. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alan Karen.
When I started this campaign, I was 6'2" with a full head of hair. It's a grueling business. We are living in an extraordinary time. It's a period of more rapid change than human beings have ever experienced. We need leaders who understand the future and welcome change and can help us to manage the change that we have to make. I think you and the voters of Maine have an awesome responsibility in this election to decide whether we're going to go backwards or we're going to go sideways between these two parties or we're going to move forward. That's the choice you're going to make. I have already said to you that if we continue to go backwards or to stall or to be afraid of the future or afraid of change, we will suffer greatly. You know, when big change happens, there are only two responses. You can adapt, survive, and maybe flourish, and you cannot adapt, decline, and maybe die. This is really the choice we have now. We cannot afford to wait any longer. I've suggested that we need some big and bold ideas on the economy. I've said, let's make an economy of little guys, which is what we used to do. Let's put the resources of government there. What I didn't get to tell you about is some other big ideas. What's the greatest export for Maine? Money, dollars. Where does it go? Oil and gas companies. $5 billion a year. We've got to make more energy here and keep more of those dollars here. The other idea is 2 years of free higher education that you can earn by staying and working in Maine. And if you do that for 10 years, that education will be free, and it's a heck of a bargain for the taxpayers of Maine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everybody who came out, and thank you especially to the candidates for their thoughtful responses. If you'd like to stay around and chat with the candidates, and they have materials here, etc., please feel free. Thanks again.